is, I suppose, the relevance of something like CES to telecoms. And, we did a piece just before it kicked off, basically arguing why it is worth keeping an eye on if you're on telecoms. And it's because a lot of these gadgets, some of which look a bit mad, some of which are a bit boring. It's very hard to see the wood for the trees because there's so many thousands of exhibitors and so many products. But the killer app or the killer device that will make something like 5G or 6G or whatever a really useful thing is probably going to emerge at somewhere like CES.
Hello and welcome to the first Telecoms.com podcast of the new year, which those who are, certainly those who are watching on video, can tell that we've had to do remotely again because the train drivers won't stop striking. I think they were on strike for all but one day this week, and that one day will have been a nightmare anyway.
I thought it was every day, but...
Well, it might as well be, because when they have those one-day gaps, it's funny how suddenly all the signals fail and there's the wrong leaves on the track and all that shit. It's the worst of both worlds. They get to come back and get paid, but they still do fuck all.
Yeah.
I haven't decided how sympathetic I am to them.
I think they all got sympathetic at all. And they're a bunch of wankers. Because all they're doing is, there might be a case for pay and all this sort of stuff, but there are millions of people in private sector companies who don't have the right to strike and who can't do anything about the situation they're in wage-wise. And all this strike action is doing is hurting other people who are worse off than them, actually. It doesn't hurt the managers who they're in arguments with. It hurts people trying to get into shops to open them up in central London or taking...
Oh, totally. The collateral damage.
Christmas, grandparents at Christmas or something. They're a bunch of wankers.
Fair enough. That's one point of view. Another point of view is that, the point of industrial action is to force the paymasters to the negotiating table. Yeah. Which I respect.
By screwing over people who aren't the paymasters.
Well, but that's what strikes do, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's why I don't like the idea of it. I think there's I'm all for labour rights and treating people fairly.
Right.
And I don't
unless it's fucking
I don't like the optics of things like bosses taking huge pay increases when they're putting nothing to staff. But as I say, most people aren't in unions these days, and people who work for Uber and these sort of grey economy firms or whatever you want to call them,
gig economy,
and yet we've got a situation where we can be held to ransom as a whole country by. This could go on forever. They could be on 150 grand a year and still saying, sorry, we don't like it.
Well, so that's the flip side. So where I have perhaps a bit more sympathy for you in the legitimacy of their actions, I do wonder how much of a grievance they have. I think they were all paid full whack during the lockdown, when obviously no one was getting a train. And I'm just not sure how hardly done by trained people are versus other parts of the economy. So that's the bit where my sympathy is more tempered, that's for sure. But anyway, so that's why we're doing it remotely. We've got my colleague, deputy editor of Telecoms.com, Andrew Wooden, on this one. Hi, Andrew.
Hello.
So we get to see your office. Lucky us.
It's got a wardrobe in it.
It's definitely got a wardrobe in it. With some classical statue work on the top of it. So that's all good.
Yes, I'm very cultured.
And we'll see why, apart from the pleasure of his company and the fact he hasn't been on for a bit. In fact, the last time Andrew was on was the one that Pierre's camera swallowed. So he's due a consolation pod, if only for that. But we're also going to talk. Our main theme's going to be CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, which Andrew's been covering for Telecoms.com. So those are all reasons why we've got Andrew on. That and to appreciate his excellent New Year facial hair, of course. I wish I could grow a goatee like that, to be honest, mate. You seem to do it effortlessly. I couldn't do it if you put a gun to my head. So fair play to you.
Yeah, so it's all right. It's all right here. It's just patchy on the side, so I can't do the full proper
So
job.
basically, you'll go to or nothing. There's going to be no Jamie Davis beard for you.
No,
the full Jamie Davis.
The full Jamie. So yes. What else were I going to say? Was that the thing we were talking before the pod, Ian, that you wanted to talk about? Was it the strikes?
Yeah.
Yeah, you wanted to mention it.
I just think it's like we're in the situation now that we were in during the pandemic because of bloody strikes, and
yeah.
I think long term they're not doing themselves any favors because all it will do is, people talked about adjusting to the,
well, totally
during the pandemic when we all made lots of investments in broadband and telecom companies did quite well, and everybody talked about the importance of digital infrastructure.
Still got my Yeti mic from the.
Yeah, I mean, it will make train. There's already an argument that that railways are sort of 19th century, increasing the obsolete infrastructure, even though they're investing in this stupid high speed railway that'll probably go on strike as soon as it's finished. But I just think it'll make people rely even less on trains in the future.
We'll change the abbreviation to huge strike too.
Yeah, huge strike. I love it. That is what it is. That's what we've got coming.
Was it you that was telling me? And there's in some countries they have industrial action and their strike is service as normal, but they won't take any fares. So basically, it hurts the train operators.
That's quite a good one,
right? Well, I like that.
But,
yeah,
I think maybe it wasn't you that was telling me then. Someone told me.
No, it wasn't me.
Someone else told me that anyway.
I quite like it. Presumably, there'd be some way in this country of them being arrested for doing that. I mean, as it is, Rishi Sunak's trying to come out with some new legislation, basically making strikes illegal by throwing. Yeah, well, he's doing it slyly. He's trying to throw a bunch of bureaucratic red tape at them, where if they haven't done that, then it's illegal. And of course, you can just see the thin end of the wedge there, because then he just keeps ramping up the red tape until there's no fucking way you can strike.
Yeah, even though I don't like the strikes, I don't know if I like the idea of banning strikes because it sounds like a retrograde step for worker rights and all this stuff. But
exactly, I think we both agree on that. We approve of strikes in principle, but in practice, this one's given us the right.
They just seem to have gone out of the way to make things as bad as possible for people at a time of the year when people do rely on the trains. Students use trains to get around at Christmas and go home. So what are they going to strike over the whole Christmas period? I mean, that's just disgraceful.
No, and your point's well made about gig economy. We're us white collar workers. I've seen us referred to as the laptop class, which is very much true. Yeah. Have laptop will work. We don't need to be in an office. The only time we need to be in an office is for this. And that's just because we prefer the studio pod to what we're doing now. But yeah, if you're if you're working in catering, hospitality, retail, any stuff like that, you got no choice. And they're the ones who are being most inconvenienced. And probably most of them are on 0-hour contracts, so they just don't get fucking paid. So they're going on strike as well, whether they like it or not. So I hear you on that one. One other thing, Ian, before in terms of sort of general bullshit. Well, actually, more generally, it's our first one in the new year. Did everyone have a good Christmas, Andrew? Did you have a nice, restful Christmas? I know you didn't get a load of time off, but how was it, mate? All good?
Yeah, it was good. Yeah, it was a week or so off. It's always nice. I mean, talking about the strikes, I mean, we don't have a car at the moment, so we were toying with the idea of trying to see family via the trains, but that was kind of not really an option anyway.
They put the kibosh on that.
Yeah, it kind of grounded us for the whole time off, really. But so it's a bit muted. But yeah, you have a great big roast dinner and some time off. What's not to like?
Well, quite. I did quite a lot of fuck all in my 2+ weeks off, and I enjoyed every moment of it. How about you, Ian? Good time?
Yeah, I did lots of fuck all as well. Actually, I think I was off for even longer than you.
Right? Yeah. You were off like for half of December, weren't you?
Yeah, I've spent half of it. I've sort of had a sequence of colds and viruses and things, so I feel
your voice is still sounding a bit baritone.
I think I've had in the last couple of weeks. I think I've had strep A.
Oh dear!
I've got.
What does that do?
Well, one thing it does, it can give you conjunctivitis, which I've had.
Oh no!
Which is not as bad as it was.
Wasn't there talk of a sort of strep thing going around with kids?
Yeah, and yeah, it doesn't. like in kids, it can be really serious if you're under 10. Like I think a few kids have actually died.
Is
from
that
it.
scarlet fever?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, my little nephew in the Canaries had a really bad one about a couple of years ago.
So I don't know. I'm speculating because it's like self-diagnosis. I didn't go get tested or anything, but reading all the symptoms and everything, and my throat basically went like tonsillitis, which is very much a kind of strep A thing. Except
I see.
So it's like tonsillitis without the tonsils, whatever you call it. Then
itis.
Some kind of throat itis.
Yeah.
And I've still kind of got a bit now. So apart from that, I've been it was nice. I mean, we do have a car, so I managed to get back and see my parents at Christmas, which is Buckinghamshire, so not that far to go. And spent a couple of days heavily and eating and
Pierre's just written on the chat that he needs a throat holiday.
I know what that's. I won't say it on this pod. That's one for after the pod.
The mind boggles.
Yeah.
I sort of had a quiet one. We just had my dad round for Christmas Day. We've normally had him crash round, but he likes his home comfort, so I sort of didn't get pissed during the day. When we always have a bit of Bucks Fizz. I make Bucks Fizz and I make scrambled eggs with smoked salmon on bagel for the Christmas breakfast. That's our traditional shit.
Nice.
And then I just do the full Monty turkey trimmings, loads of roast potatoes. There's always far too much of everything.
Yeah.
But that's all good. I gather you did the turkey this year, Ian, but it had a bit of a surprise ingredient.
That meal that you're talking about wasn't actually Christmas. That was like about a week. When we get my son's my older son's tennis coach, who we've known for many, many years and doesn't have family down here. So we sort of get him over and have a pre-Christmas meal that is basically a Christmas meal, but it's before Christmas. But yeah, I managed to, while I was doing it, managed somehow to drop my phone into the oven.
And didn't realise?
Yeah, I mean, our oven's quite low down and it opens from the top. And I had it slightly open.
You must have had it in your...
And my phone sort of wriggled its way up my pocket and then kind of plonked out into the gap between the oven and the door. And I thought I knocked a pan over. I did hear a bang, but I thought I sort of knocked a pan over somehow.
You're not going to think that'll be my phone, are you?
And then closed the oven and then sort of went to check on the roast potatoes about 20 minutes later. And there's this weird sort of metal smell coming from the oven. And I noticed my sort of iPhone 6 frying away at the bottom. So
Lime, had it melted?
It was still intact, but it was obviously like you couldn't touch it without using oven gloves. The weird thing is that in all that kind of, I mean, the insides must have looked like Gruyere cheese by that stage, but the but the SIM card actually survived. So I tried the SIM card out on another phone. It was fine. Magda, my wife, was due a phone upgrade like a week later. So she's now got an iPhone 13 and I've got her old iPhone 11.
Oh, that's all right. Isn't that what you? Isn't that what you broke before, which meant that you had to revert back to that 6?
Yeah. So another domestic disaster involved breaking an iPhone 12 actually, and then I'd sort of used the 6 or 7 to.
Well, that one's properly dead now.
Because 6 or 7, most apps aren't supported anymore. There's various things you can't do, and they're really slow running. You notice how old they are when you start using one. So happily,
okay, so you're back up to speed.
Yeah.
Cool. Congratulations. Right.
Thank you very much.
I think that's enough waffling. I think when we were last podding, it was really cold. It's like unseasonably warm now, isn't it?
Yeah, especially if you're in northern Spain. Apparently, it's about 25 degrees or something in Bilbao.
Right. I know. I've had the BBC and the Guardian, which I receive their alerts every time it's a bit hot. They don't waste any time going, fucking hell, global warming. And it's like, I mean, they might be right, but they're just on it. Okay. Are you all still there? I've got everyone frozen. Yeah. Okay. There was just a brief freezing thing. All right, I better crack on. So what we can chat about as we trailed. I should do, even though we're remote, I should say, remind people that if you're watching this on the website or on YouTube or on Facebook, you can listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, loads of other podcasting platforms. Apparently, Pierre tells me we had a record year for listens last year, so thank you very much, audience. In fact, I won't name them, but someone someone my wife knows knows someone who works in telecoms, and they mentioned it, and apparently they listen to it as well. So it's weird. Look, Pierre's just sent us a little message saying the top cities of 2022 were London, Sydney, and Oslo, and the top countries were UK, US, and Australia, not Norway. Cool, isn't that interesting? Global phenomenon that we are. Right. So yeah, we're going to start by chatting about CES, and I'll sort of hand the ball over to Andrew, and then Ian and I can always sort of pitch up and ask him why we care. And then I think there's going to be a natural segue from that into a couple of other CES announcements, but which weren't covered by Andrew, but were by me, which is from Qualcomm. They're kind of diversifying the areas they get into because they're known mostly for smartphones and that sort of thing. And then we're going to finish off by having a bit of an Open RAN chat, because we had the first greenfield or full Open RAN network launched in Europe this week. Or was it this week? Or anyway, recently.
It was this week, I believe. Yeah.
Right. Cool. So we'll chat about that. So having said all that, why don't I hand it over to you, Andrew? What's been going on at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, Nevada?
Yeah, so it's still going on at the moment. Started yesterday. At the time
it sort of starts. It has a day -2, -10. It sort of creeps back, doesn't it?
They have the press day when all the sort of big tech firms, Sony and Nvidia and the types get on stage. Increasingly, car companies actually. I think John Deere was the headline speaker this year. I might be wrong. They definitely did speak. Tractors, and they're quite big on autonomous tractors and things like that. Which I saw someone point out that's actually one way where it's quite easy to automate something like that when you're talking about autonomous driving.
Just give it a route and say get the fuck on with it.
You don't. All the complicated stuff comes with other vehicles, presumably not having to dodge too many.
Well, you could make them too autonomous, and we might get into this in a bit. You start giving them too much AI, they might just go, nah, I like the look of that field more. And fuck wheat, I want cabbages or something like that. I don't want
to be a farmer. I want to be an artist.
Yeah, I want to be a drag racer.
Exactly.
I want the glamour. Anyway.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's huge. It's on every year. There's something, I think 100,000 people went this year, which won't be its biggest year pre-COVID height, I wouldn't have thought. But yeah,
but back up to that level. Because they were basically they had all this hybrid sort of, trying to find a way of having the event without having it in person last year. Because but let's not forget, at the start of 2022, a lot of people were still shitting themselves about COVID, weren't they?
We weren't sure if there was going to be another lockdown over Christmas around the same time. It was being floated. We didn't, but it was a possibility. So a lot happened in the last 12 months. But yeah, they were right. They were very close to it, CES, as opposed to MWC, which there was a bit less fear around that, and I think you had lots of high-profile exhibitors pulling out, like in November time, 2020. So they ended up
2021.
Doing this. And they ended up doing this sort of hybrid. Basically means you've got a diminished show floor, less people there, and half.
And if people can be bothered, they can dial into like webinars, basically.
Yeah, and the firms that don't pitch up there just
so 100,000's a decent turnout. That would be sort of close to peak turnout for Mobile World Congress.
And I mean it's the biggest one going. So I don't know what it was at absolute peak, but I've been there a few times, as have you. I've
even met you there once. Were you still at PC Retail when I met you there that time?
Yes,
I think I was at Strategy Analytics.
I think I was looking after that as well as some others by that point, though. I don't think
you
I
were
was
still at that company.
It was.
I remember you had a mind to go and find a poker game. I thought, oh, that's brave of you.
Yeah. Well, when in Rome. But
luckily we didn't find one.
No, we didn't bother in the end. But Yeah, it's that thing. I mean, I assume that's why they set it in Las Vegas, because particularly the consumer side, when firms like to take out clients and things like that, it's quite a cool place to entertain. Plus, it's completely set up for hotels for 100,000
exactly, and
people.
conferencing. Yeah.
Exactly, but yeah, Las Vegas is a bit like Marmite, though, isn't it? It's very, very tacky. I've got some fond memories of going over the years, but I don't know what I think about it now. It's especially when you, like, in the daytime, when you see around the sides of the buildings, and it's quite a grimy place. Yeah.
And the superficiality of it all. I've only enjoyed Vegas once, and I've been there a few times, but I've only been there once purely for leisure, and I enjoyed it then. It was a stag trip. It was almost entirely nocturnal, and we were just properly larging it. You know, we were playing blackjack. We were all having a laugh, and that was all groovy. But
how long ago was
being
that,
there during the day, I find you what?
How long ago was that?
Oh, quite a long time ago.
Because I enjoyed it the first time I went, and I think one of the reasons was it used to be really cheap. Back sort of 99, 2000, which
you
is
could
the first
certainly
time
the hotels, they'd sort of in the hope that you gamble.
You could drink and eat cheaply as well. They had those $10 buffets, you know, and all that sort of stuff back in around about the turn of the century. When I've been in the recent years, it's just ridiculously expensive.
Yeah, and they fucked up the strip as well, because we used to, when we went for that stag, we stayed in a hotel called the Boardwalk, which is a real shitty, like, tier 3 one. And since then, that's been knocked down, and the site where it was and other hotels is now where they've got things like the Cosmo and the Aria and that super posh bit. And the other problem with that site is it's meant that you can't just walk up and down the strip. One of the few things you can do for free in Vegas is walk up and down the strip and go, oh, look, there's a little Eiffel Tower. And now they've fucked up the strip where they force you to go into the Cosmo and the Aria and have... And the other thing that I find appalling, apart from the sort of glitzy superficiality of it, which is fine if you're off your tits with your mates, but not so much if you're going to a trade show when you're on dry January, which incidentally we all are, drinking my water, is just how utterly rapacious the place is. How just everywhere you go, you get the impression that you're someone's basically trying to mug you, but legally. So yeah, I find all that quite stressful. Sorry, Andrew, that was a bit of a tangent. But
no.
But yeah, so you got...
it's all part of it. But yeah. So
what's the point of, like, CES? Before you get into particular highlights this year, perhaps you could just remind people who aren't as familiar with it as you are what the underlying point of CES is, what the theme is.
Yeah, so CES has been going for 60, 70 years or something. Long old time. Yeah, I don't think it hasn't been in Vegas all that long, but I think it was in Atlanta before that. But it's the consumer electronics show. It's consumer tech, and pretty much anyone who's anything in the tech space will be involved in some way, shape, or form. It's just showing off the latest products, the trends, and everything else. Interestingly, Apple's never there. Who's arguably sort of...
They never go to any trade shows.
No, they're too cool. Too cool for
They
school.
even stopped going. I remember years ago, they even stopped going to Macworld.
Yeah. I mean, I guess they can get away with it because you've got a really strong brand. You don't need those. You don't need a third-party platform to do so.
Yeah.
So why bother? I suppose.
Well, their whole thing is they're too cool for school, isn't it?
Well, but they also don't liaise with anybody, do they? I mean, it's all the Apple ecosystem. They do all their own stuff, software, hardware.
Well, that's the thing. They don't really do.
They don't need partners.
They don't do PR.
Yeah, exactly. Like when I used to try and naively get hold of them for stories or whatever, and you wouldn't get through to anyone. They were up for awards we used to run and stuff, and it certainly wouldn't send anyone, but you wouldn't even be able to speak to anyone to get a quote or anything. That's just not how they do it. So they don't pitch up at events like this and show off the latest iPhone either, and they don't need to. But everybody else sort of gets involved. Usually you're looking for, it can be seen as a bit of a bellwether for what the big tech trends will be for the following year. Recent years, has an awful lot to do with cars, sort of smart cars, connected cars, autonomous cars, whatever the buzzword is, and things like the connected home always come up and have come up ever since I've been covering it years and years ago. I remember the first time I went, that stuff was all there. Is
and you'd have weird shit, which is something that's still going on, like that. What was that Philips light bulb that changes color? And
Philips AmbiX. I think that's how I went the first time. They took me out there on a press trip, basically, and I had to, write this feature on it, and it was something very similar came out at this show, and it looks almost the same thing, slightly repackaged. It's the idea that you have sort of strip lighting or whatever around your computing
bulbs or whatever.
Yeah, and you're playing a game and an explosion happens and they go, oh, orange light, red light in your face, and it's supposed to be immersive. It's interesting.
It probably is, but it's quite niche, isn't it? You better be really into gaming if you're giving over a whole room to the vibe.
Well, I remember not being convinced 15 years ago, and it doesn't look like it's changed too much. But yeah, there you go. I mean, and that's another thing to say about CES. It's throwing everything at the wall, and some of it sticks.
It's exactly.
You get,
and that's sometimes the fun bit is these sort of niche, weird use cases. But yeah, exactly. You focused on, as you say, on connected cars and connected home. What were the car highlights for you?
Yeah, so there was one in particular called a Feeler, which is a product. It's Sony and Honda got together and came up with that one. And the car, do you want to know why it's called a Feeler?
Does the car feel you up while you're driving?
Like rope it.
It's called a Feeler. Let me read out the quote. Because a feeler expresses an interactive relationship where people feel mobility as an intelligent entity, and mobility feels people and society using sensing and network IT technologies. I mean,
what a load of
I don't think
just superlative marketing guff.
Yeah, I mean, what can
name's not going to work. It's going to get the piss out of it so much that.
Well, it's strange, isn't it? I mean, Sony and Honda are very strong brands in their own way. You think a Sony car might be quite cool. You could see that being.
It sounds like a continuation of the trend of shit branding, in the in the sort of vein of EE and things like that. To be honest,
yeah.
What is EE? Everything everywhere.
Everything everywhere all at once or something. But yeah, so this car. I mean, they've all got 400 sensors on them, and a myriad of sort of entertainment options. And I think this one in particular made a big deal of its in-car gaming setup. They always remind you that it's for when you're parked, not for when you're on the M25.
Or for when you're in the back.
Yeah, exactly. You fancy a blast of COD in a traffic jam.
But I like the thought of someone playing something like Grand Theft Auto while they're driving.
Yes,
and just getting confused.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, and I think this year the term, what was it, software defined car seems to be bandied around. I think you.
Yeah, well, I've got some of that in the Qualcomm context to talk about as well.
And there's lots of that. I mean, so there was that Feeler. I mean, they all look very nice. That one isn't a pure concept car. Like, that's the other thing to say. A lot of these things get rolled up. They're never going to make it to market. They're just here's some sort of practical application of what the technology could be. But that serves a purpose. There was another one from BMW, the iVision D, which again, lots of in-car stuff and sensors, but this one makes a big deal out of you can change the surface, so you can change its color and do things like that.
I see. It's got like a chameleon thing going on.
It's that sort of thing, and the Volkswagen ID7 has something similar there as well. And it's how practical some of that is, I don't know. I mean, the interesting thing is I saw someone point out in a bit of analysis that all this stuff used to be about autonomous driving, right? And it is, we're getting closer and closer to that car from Total Recall, and you just put your feet up and it will drive you to work or whatever. And
someone with this little dummy at the front.
Yeah, what is it called? Johnny.
Little bloke with a hat on. He's Postman Pat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, brilliant. But yeah, so there seems to be less emphasis on that. That was someone else's analysis, but it seemed to ring true when you look through all the sort of marketing guff. And they're all talking about what you can do in car, change the color of it. The hubcaps can change color as well. I don't know. That's all fine and good. Maybe is that because pure proper autonomous driving is proving to be not as easily done as maybe they thought 4 years ago. Who knows? And they're now trying to say, well, this is why you need a sort of teched up supercar.
Well, that reminds me of.
That's what it is. I think.
Yeah, I was going to say, Ian, I've just got a quick point, and I'll hand it over to you to see if you agree. I get the impression that CES, especially, I mean, this happens at a lot of big trade shows. It certainly happens to some extent at Mobile World Congress, but CES especially, tech shows, not trade shows. The phrase I always use is solutions looking for a problem, or first world problem solved. No one's sitting there going, yeah, my car's all right. It gets me from A to B. Stereo's decent, all that sort of thing. But it doesn't dynamically change color according to my mood. So it's always solving these first world problems. Now, having said that, I've got a rich sort of history of being a Luddite and going, well, you don't need that. That's fucking bollocks. And then it turning out to be really popular and transformational. But what do you think, Ian? Do you agree with my gut feel that a lot of this stuff is sort of desperately looking to innovate for the sake of it without there being an obvious point of it?
It's not really innovation. I think I totally agree with what Andrew just said. I think, if you remember 4 years ago, there was a lot of talk about self-driving cars. We were talking about it in the pod quite a bit, even, about when we were. There was there seemed to be this expectation that by the mid-2020s, even as early as that, or certainly later this decade, we'd all be in self-driving vehicles. And I think I think everybody's realised it's quite a lot harder to get to that point than they assumed it would be. And it might not even be for technology reasons. It might be to do with regulation, actually, as much as anything. Who takes the blame if one of these things crashes?
Yeah.
I think that's that. If you talk to some experts, they say that's the really big hurdle. Actually, it's the kind of legislative stuff and the safety stuff. But so I think car makers are looking. The car industry, it sounds like it's almost in the same situation as the smartphone industry. Whoever asked to have a see-through smartphone? Nobody. But one's come out from a company called Nothing, another crap brand. Another example of a crap brand.
Yeah.
And it's come out with a see-through phone. Wow. So you can see the inner circuitry of the phone. That's just what I wanted. Yeah. Christmas, that is. Yeah. But it doesn't actually do anything new. And I
wouldn't give you one. You'll just end up baking it.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you can cook it and it tastes
You can see if it's done.
But see if it's bubbling inside.
None of these devices anymore actually do anything. They've reached the sort of limits of smartphone innovation, it seems. So it's all
totally
tweaks. It's like a slightly better camera, a slightly better processor. You can look through it. The car industry is sort of in the same position. I think they are smart vehicles now. There's so much you can do inside them. They're all connected. You can play videos, you can play games, you can. They're hybrid. Where do you go next? Unless it flies or takes you there, then you have to come up with something.
I've spoken about my Ford Focus, my new and inverted commas Ford Focus that I bought in the middle of last year, but that was 5 years old, and even that. But it was probably about 10 years newer than the Ford Focus I had previously. For some reason, I'm sticking with Ford Focuses just because I can't be fucked to think about it. And they, they tend to they've done me all right. But it's got things like cruise control and all that sort of thing. And there's some things that are genuinely useful, like those rear sensors to help you when you're parking and that sort of thing. And some of these newer cars come with like auto parallel parking. I don't know how foolproof that is. But even cruise control, I'm in two minds about because I sort of use it. But then I get lulled into a full sense of security and I've taken my foot off the pedals. And then suddenly I'm on the motorway and someone slams on the brakes and I'm like, fuck. Where's my foot supposed to be? Yeah. So a lot of this automation, and I'll come on to it. I won't get into it now because the Qualcomm segment brings us onto more of this sort of Luddite stuff. But yeah, I think, it's one thing, I'll ask Andrew in a sec to talk about the smart home stuff. It's one thing having, the cliche, the typical CES thing, I can remember writing about these all the way back when Andrew and I first worked with each other 15 plus years ago when I was at PC Retail, was the connected fridge. The connected fridge has been a thing forever, and it's just a typical CES first world problem. And you'll get ones that have got an LCD on the front that will show you an image of what's inside the fridge, like it's such a hassle to open the goddamn door. And or maybe even ones that are connected such that they'll work out when you're out of milk and automatically order some, or that sort of thing. But it's never caught on. And similar,
So I quite like that one.
Yeah, but would you pay extra for it?
I don't know if I pay. That's the trouble. Would you pay extra for it? But the idea of that is, I mean, that actually does sound like a service. If the fridge detects that something that you require on a regular basis is run low, and then it orders it in, and you get
I get a bit twitchy on the control freak side. I'm like, fuck you, fridge. I'll decide when I need more milk.
That's a widespread technology problem, though, isn't it? It's like your smartphone now basically runs your life and tells you what to do and what music you should listen to and what content you should receive and read each day. And it's gone so far with those devices.
Well, exactly. I don't like any of it.
Yeah, no, I agree. You're right.
Pierre just messaged, "Fuck you, fridge." What a quote.
We should seize the different technology.
I've reached the age where I start having arguments with my domestic appliances.
Well, you'll be pleased to know that they're still trotting that out. I mean,
okay, you'll go ahead with your connected home segment, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, that is the interesting thing about it is the stuff they were talking about. Yeah, say 15 years ago, they're still talking about, and it's one of those things where, like a really expensive, really connected, intelligent fridge. Like, yeah, you can do it for 20 grand. And therefore what all these, it's called the Consumer Electronics Show, right? You can do anything. I'm sure if a load of engineers and with the R&D budget of someone like Samsung could make all sorts of mad shit, basically, but it's not a success unless it can be so scalable and because so many people want it and you get the economies of scale come into it and all that, then it's a product, then it's something you can do.
Well, then it is a bit, I suppose things like this are a bit of a proving ground. An analogy might be like fashion shows, those impossibly beautiful skinny models wearing fucking boxes or Christmas trees or whatever. No one's ever going to wear that kind of haute couture fashion. But somehow that seems to be the start of the food chain, which ends up at fucking Primark at some stage a couple of years later. Yeah, but I've got to admit, I don't know how often stuff I've seen at CES ever made it into curries.
Well, there is. I mean, we talk about the kind of the quirky stuff, and some of the connected home stuff is quite easy to take the mick out of because it all, as you say, some of it just seems unneeded. Is that a word? No. But the other,
unnecessary.
You know what I meant. Unnecessary, yes. But the other half of CES is the real kind of workman-like updates. You get AMD and Intel coming out with their latest generation of chips, and that's all useful stuff for pushing things forward. You probably get 500,000 laptops, and a lot. Not all of them are see-through, or they've got, I don't know, a face looking at you. Some of them are just the latest ones. So it is the place to go to check out all that stuff.
By the way, I should correct myself slightly. I've got a new work laptop. It's still a Dell, but this one has got facial recognition. So when I open it up and turn it on, I don't have to put in my password. It just recognizes it's me. So there we are. Sometimes these things are handy. I mean, I coped without it, but it's handy.
Yeah, all these little quality of life things that you'll get in a modern smartphone would have been written up as a press release maybe 20 years ago or whatever. And people would have gone, well, what the hell do you need that for? And it kind of, and that's the thing. I mean, the other thing to say is, I suppose, the relevance of something like CES to telecoms. And, we did a piece just before it kicked off, basically arguing why it is worth keeping an eye on if you're on telecoms. And it's because a lot of these gadgets, some of which look a bit mad, some of which are a bit boring. It's very hard to see the wood for the trees because there's so many thousands of exhibitors and so many products. But the killer app or the killer device that will make something like 5G or 6G or whatever a really useful thing is probably going to emerge at somewhere like CES as opposed to MWC. The way we described it was it's almost like they're two sides of the same coin. So if MWC, in terms of network infrastructure and why you need better connectivity, if MWC is the how, CES is the why. Why do you need all this stuff?
I can go with that.
But they didn't this year.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's. I think that's correct in principle. This year, it just so happens. I'm not seeing anything jump out.
Well, what you're saying, Andrew, tallies with other things I've read, and I didn't go and pay a huge amount of attention to it, but I read a few things on the BBC and some other sites saying there wasn't really anything to get that excited about at CES, and I think that's the problem for the industry, isn't it? That they're all sort of, what we were just saying about smartphone innovation and what else can you do? Everybody's hanging out for that next killer device, if you like, the next form factor, the next thing that. I'm a bit surprised there wasn't more about the metaverse and headsets, to be honest with you, at CES. Maybe there was, but
there was plenty. It was there. I mean, there's plenty of everything. That's the thing. I think there wasn't necessarily much new said about the metaverse there. I mean, it's hard. I didn't go. It's very hard to keep track of this stuff if you're actually there on the show floor. There's someone saying everything.
There were at least more people, from what I gather, because last year was a real washout. I think there was hardly anybody when the Americans.
Yeah, there's
very worried about
100,000 this year, and last year it was half virtual. So in that terms of that, but maybe firms weren't sure about that. Maybe they're keeping their powder dry in terms of having a big launch there. If that's how these things work, I don't know. I mean, there's things that did look quite good. Like there's a Samsung, was it called a Flex phone, something like that. So it's a smartphone that is bendable, which is a little trend now, and
slidable. I think was the new thing. Bendable we've had for a little while, but slidable. I don't know why you'd want to slide it, but you can now. So
it all seems a bit desperate, though, doesn't it?
It didn't look terrible. Now I'm usually with you with that stuff, but from the videos, and I haven't played with it, it didn't look terrible. Actually, it did look like you could pull that out. But still, the problem with all that is. Because they're all dressed up as media devices. It's like great. They have an OLED screen, for example. I still don't know in which situation you're going to go. Oh, great! We'll get the popcorn and the latest Avengers films out. Just pop my phone on the table and then just watch that.
Well, some people do it. I've seen people do it, like on the train and stuff. Watch. And so I could see how having something in your pocket which you can expand for a bigger screen would be handy for them. I've just always thought with these foldables, with these sort of hybrid devices where they're basically saying it's a smartphone that turns into a small tablet. And I think this about most convergent devices. If we forget for a moment that a smartphone is definitively a massive convergent device that's really good. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when you buy separate sat navs and separate digital cameras and separate this, that, and the other. Smartphone basically fucked about 10 other industries because it's so convergent. But I think it's the convergent form factor rather than functionality. Having a more bulky phone just on the off chance you're going to want to watch, EastEnders on the train. I'm just not sure that's compelling. And I think sales, if I was back at Strategy Analytics, they'd be tracking these things. I suspect that their numbers for like flip phones are still pretty low.
Do you mean foldable phones?
We watch a lot of video though on, the iPhone Pro or whatever it is, and the Galaxy equivalent of that. They're fairly big screens. If you're watching
6-inch plus screens,
yeah. I mean, and you're holding it quite close. It's not like a TV where it's a few meters away. You're holding it there. So I have tried watching programs on my iPhone. I mean, the one I've got at the moment, the 11, is still a decent sized screen, and I've tried watching programs on something that size on a Eurostar journey. I think I kind of preloaded it, and it was actually okay. It was fine. You can do it because you're holding it or you're putting it quite near to you. There's not really an issue with it, I don't think.
And Pierre, who is more expert on these sorts of things, being a videographer as he is, message saying the problem is that when you unfold them, the aspect ratio is all wrong for video. So if video is generally sent in a landscape, I don't know, 3x4 or whatever, some of these things are square, so that gets all a bit fucked up when you unfold them. Yeah. So anyway, there's that. Talking about Samsung, Andrew, I mean, I've always thought Samsung, along with a couple of other sort of East Asian big tech conglomerates like Sony and LG, are the sort of definitive CES companies for me, because they get involved in so much stuff. And I noticed in your coverage, in the one that you just put up today, about the smart home gizmos, you started off with a thing called Samsung Smart Things Station, which seems like a bit of a hub for these things. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so that's exactly what it is. Yeah, Samsung will turn up to a show like this and launch dozens and dozens and dozens of things, and they're across all different sectors. So they're definitely one of the more active companies, and this Smart Things Station kind of sits in the middle of all that. Now, the relevant thing to talk about there is that one of the biggest problems with smart home stuff, I would say, was that it was so disparate and fragmented in that you had all these firms wanting to not only be in the space, but kind of own the space. So it's like, we'll use our platform, our ecosystem, and because they want to be in the middle of it, because then they're in the middle of it and they can do all that. But it's like, okay, but I don't have a speaker that's on that system. On your,
so it's not platform. Compatible.
So I've got to go and rebuy all my kit, or just only ever buy kit for you. That was the problem, I think. I don't know.
I think Google's pushing an ecosystem as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's fine. But one of these things that seems to have been put together to try and address that is Matter, which is
that's it. That's the Google thing.
Well, no, Matter.
At least I thought it was.
Matters is kind of like a interoperability standard.
Okay. Maybe Google supports it. Maybe that's why I'm getting it twisted.
Well, that's the idea. The idea is that it sits across all of them, so you can be Matter compatible, like you are, whatever compatible. And so something like, so that was a big thing to say at CES. There was a lot of talk of that. I think this Matter came out around this time last year, anyway. And now all these smartphone gizmos are being like Matter compatible, which is the point of something like that. The idea is they can all work
which
together.
if it becomes ubiquitous is quite handy, isn't it?
But
it sort of makes sense.
Wouldn't they? I mean, what is it? So that the apps are compatible between different manufacturers.
That and essentially the hardware. So if you had everything running on a Google platform, say through an app or whatever, and your Amazon Alexa speaker wasn't compatible, you can't. Basically, that's not much use to you, is it? Unless you're going to go and rebuy all your kit along with one. What they call vendor lock-in. The point of Matter is it's supposed to let everything work together a bit more
and enable these hubs like that Samsung thing.
Yeah, and then you could in theory control everything from one hub, and maybe that could be an app. Actually, there's no reason it has to be a hub, but this one is. And the idea is, you can control your smart lights and your fridge, and it's a little wireless charging station as well. And you can kind of bring all the controls into one place, and who knows? I mean, it's those things. I think it sort of makes sense, but as long as they stick with being brand agnostic with it, and a lot of them are still kind of pushing it as and then our system's on there as well, and that's potentially where it gets tricky. But that was definitely something new from the smart home space at CES this year.
And there's a couple of, just to finish off this segment, a couple of what I would call quirkies. They probably don't think of it that way in your smart home bit. So we got a connected fridge from LG. What's their latest take on the modern fridge?
It turns your kitchen into a rave. Essentially.
In what way?
So it's got great big LCD lights on it, so it can play. So I think it said 190,000 color combinations. if you like. And so sort of, and then what it's also got a Bluetooth speaker in it. And what it will do is when you're playing music through your fridge, it will sync up the lights as we all
it's a
aching to do.
That doubles as a disco system, basically.
Well, yeah. So the lights.
It's like a Qualcomm washing machine or something.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you'd have to see it in person, I suppose. But it sounds like what they're saying is you're playing your music to your fridge, and the lights are sort of blaring in line with what's going on. It's got some drum and bass going or something. It's just going mental in the corner and just flashing lights at you while you're chopping onions. So
it's called. I'm just looking at your story, Andrew. It's called Mood Up, and there's a little canned quote presumably from the press release, that says, integrating advanced AI, the module enables the Mood Up to improve and extend the user experience with features such as upgraded voice recognition and Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connectivity. Okay, so that doesn't even talk about the LED panels.
No, the bit.
But yeah, I like the fact it's got advanced AI. See, this is where we're getting into Scott proper Ludditism / Terminator stuff. And then one last thing. Go on, sorry.
I was just going to say, partly I don't know how much. I don't think it's possible to launch a new product now without saying it's got some sort of AI. Bluetooth because it would just be like, well, hasn't even got AI in it? Oh, well, my pencil sharpener's got AI. Sort of
reminds me of Red Dwarf. Did you ever watch Red Dwarf, Andrew? Yeah. And they had this thing called Talkie Toaster. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it was slightly broken. It was just really annoying and persistent, and it would just keep hassling you to have toast. We wouldn't take no for an answer.
Yeah.
That was brilliant. Red Dwarf's so good for that sort of thing. Yeah. And then one last thing, Andrew. Just scrolling through your article. So there's a company called Withings, who I don't know if you knew, Andrew, but they were actually acquired by, I think it was Nokia a while back. And then Nokia realized that they had no business getting into sort of IoT devices, and so then they got rid of them again. But they've come up with a device which looks like it quite literally takes the piss. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the U-Scan, it's a brilliant picture that. They didn't have any press images, so that's just what they've got on the front of their website selling it.
Okay, nice one. This screenshot, is it?
Yeah, a picture of them just relieving themselves on the homepage for you.
So just so that people can see it, I mean, we probably could if we were set up, but I'll just describe it. It's a picture of a device with some kind of liquid in a thin stream cascading over it. It's mercifully not very yellow, but I think that's the point they're trying to make. So you piss on this thing, and then what happens?
Not me personally, but it's a little device. It looks like it hooks under your toilet basin.
Right, like a little disinfectant thing.
Yeah, and you piss on it, and it's got all these sorts of sensors in it, and it can then give you some information about what they call biomarkers. So things like how hydrated you are, your nutrition, and I think they're talking about in the future, it will have the capability to track sort of menstrual cycles, things like that.
Right.
It's a connected toilet.
It's a device to make your toilet connected.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. I mean, I guess this comes under health tech as well as it does the connected home.
Yeah, and I bet there was a lot of that at CES as well.
Yeah,
does it analyze your shit as well? Does it analyze your shit as well? Can you shit on it and get some nutritional information about, you need more protein?
Mercifully, for the sake of the image they'd need, no. But who knows?
If you shit on it, then that's rubbish.
I mean, it's the same. It's the same. But it's the same ballpark. I mean, these things are a general sort of medical tests you do to find out all sorts of things.
That was a separate launch, Ian. It's called the Logmaster 5000.
Oh no. Yeah. So
the only thing, a slight tangent about the sort of digital health stuff, which a lot of it's really good. Like we're in the UK right now, all our public services appropriate enough going down the toilet. But one real answer to the inefficiencies of the NHS is, of course, to have more diagnostic equipment at home, and to have to not have to go in and see the doctor. and all that sort of thing. And so I'm in favour of sort of digital health to a certain degree. The thing that the thing I find slightly off-putting about it is you could get a bit obsessed. You've got all this data. You're wearing a fitness band. You can see how many steps you've done. Every time you have a slash, it tells you to fucking chill out on the lagers for a bit. And you've just got all this incoming medical data. It feels like it makes a hypochondriac out of everyone, but that could just be me. Perhaps better to know than be in blissful ignorance. For example, if one of these piss gadgets told you you had cancer, that would be quite handy, wouldn't it?
Well, exactly. I think, joking aside, I don't know, I can't speak to the quality of this, but in general, it's sort of home healthcare kit, smart health kit, you could see that playing quite a good role in terms of preventative healthcare. A lot of the things people get in trouble for is because they've caught things too late. If you had a sort of
cancer's a brilliant
readout of things, exactly, and you probably could get quite grim about it and just be, well, what are my stats now? I suppose, but I think people do that by all sorts of things. Social media, you just have to keep it in check, I suppose. But probably, one of the least frivolous things, although we wrote up quite amusingly, the CES had really, or things of that ilk. You can genuinely see
I still put it as a quirky,
that being useful.
Yeah, that's the kind of guy I am, because it involves toilets. Snigger. Cool. Right, I better move it on because we've banged on for about an hour on that. So yeah, just moving on. My CES coverage was principally Qualcomm, and basically Qualcomm we know primarily for sort of modems and processors inside phones, branded Snapdragon. It's basically in the process of diversifying that Snapdragon brand a lot. And the two main manifestations of that at CES were one that was called Snapdragon Ride, and they came up with an SoC, which, if you don't know, stands for System on Chip, which is basically what these super duper embedded chips are. It's called the Snapdragon Ride Flex, and that's apparently it powers. It's called Flex because it's scalable, and it's a suite of chips that can power everything from what they call a digital cockpit, which I suppose is quite a lot of the stuff you were just talking about earlier from some of the things you saw at CES, to ADAS, which stands for Advanced Driver Assistance Systems. And I think that includes things like automatic braking and maybe parking assist and shit like that. And then even automated driving. So Qualcomm's trying to basically plant its flag to say we're the chip dudes for the sort of modern car. And we know that modern cars do have a shitload of chips in them. So it seems like an obvious direction for Qualcomm to go in. There will obviously be lots of incumbent players. And so I thought that was interesting. Although one thing, before I move on to their other announcement, and invite comment on this, they, at the same time, this is unrelated, but it's just a coincidence of time. Some guy, some hacker, had decided to see if he could hack into contemporary cars. And it turns out there were loads of ones: BMW, Rolls-Royce, Honda, Nissan, Mercedes, Ferrari, all these ones. He was able to, him and his team of geeks were able to hack into to a certain extent, which is things like remotely unlocking, engine starting, doing all sorts of stuff. Now, those are probably outliers, and these super duper hackers, not everyone's got their capabilities. And these hackers, when they are responsible, I believe that this hacker found this stuff out months ago, and the responsible thing to do when you find shit like this out isn't to stick it straight on social media, but to go to the companies and go, just so you know, I was able to hack your stuff, and then they can work on patches and all that sort of thing. But it just strikes me, again, that sort of Luddite, it appeals to the Luddite in me, because the more complex and the more connected and the more smart, in inverted commas, these cars become, the more vulnerable they are to external influence. It strikes me that, I'll ask you first, Ian, do you share that qualm with me
about people being able to take things over? And
yeah,
as long
as things get smarter,
we don't want any Chinese chips in these cars, do we? Because otherwise,
yeah, I mean, I'm not totally sold on that Chinese chips bad, American chips good binary propaganda. But I see your point. If only they're using it to sort of get data on us or whatever,
Yeah, or Xi Jinping could have fleets of BMWs driving the wrong way down the M1, causing mass carnage in the UK.
Again, I just not buying. I'm not buying the US propaganda on that. But yes, there's certainly some evidence that they, given half the chance, like with things like TikTok and that sort of thing, they will play fast and loose with data security and that sort of thing.
The whole sort of security stuff is becoming like a real worry, I think. Not just this car situation, but, and I know it's been talked about for a long time in IoT generally, but things like healthcare devices, people who have insulin drips that are automated, for instance, or and I think the hackers have said, yeah, you can easily get into them and fiddle around with it and alter the.
Yeah,
I mean, why you'd want
and
to
have ransomware saying pay 10 grand or no fucking insulin.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, you might sort of find your local billionaire who's on an insulin drip and then hack into his.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, the Saudi Arabians were even able to hack into Jeff Bezos's smartphone, so no one's safe.
Yeah, and the sector that we're in specifically, not on the consumer device gadget side of it, but you hear about networks becoming more, not necessarily more vulnerable, but new vulnerabilities emerging because of people taking advantage of cloud technologies and everything being more cloud native and relying on open source software.
Yeah, well, that was a real angle to this Qualcomm thing, because they were I think Andrew might have mentioned this earlier. They were talking up this concept of the software defined vehicle. And I know we've had like software defined networks and software defined this, that, and the other for a while. But there were two reasons why you want over and above things like sat nav and that sort of thing, why you want a car to be constantly connected. One is obviously over the air updates for the increasingly complicated suite of software that you've got on them. But another is cloud computing. If you want these cars to do all this incredible processing, there comes a point where you just can't do all that processing locally.
Yeah.
So you're going to want to offset a lot of the actual computing to the cloud. And the thing that concerns me about that also is it just makes you umbilically dependent on being connected, which is obviously a problem if you become unconnected. And as we know, networks aren't so perfect that you don't still have not spots. But also when you're permanently connected, you're permanently connected potentially to third parties.
Yeah, this is the thing that worries me about, the sort of race to connect everything and to spend more time online and all this. And, it's like all these things. Something really bad will probably happen in the next 3 or 4 years in terms of a security incident. There'll be something that's really quite serious and worrying and that affects people in a really kind of bad way. And then there'll be this massive outpouring of, well, why didn't we think about this? We need to introduce these informations and control. It's always the same whenever something, it's the sort of horse bolted from the. It's the same. It's the same with anything. It's not just related to security, but something's probably going to happen in the next 5 years where everybody goes, oh, look, we were too reliant on connectivity and we didn't think enough about the security side of it. I mean, the open source stuff really worries me because, I mean, there's two arguments with open source. There's if it's open source and everybody's able to sort of dabble in it and review it and and everybody's taking advantage of it, then you get peer reviews and you get the sort of community working to make sure it's more secure. There's no what's that kind of a comment that they come out. There's no security in obscurity is the sort of attack
right.
They throw at the proprietary guys.
Yeah, and the wisdom of crowds and all that sort of thing.
The wisdom of crowds, you're more likely to get problems in something that just one company's developed. But then the other side of it is that if you put it out there to the wider world, then obviously bad actors can come along and fiddle around with it and take advantage of it and introduce, glitches and this kind of thing. And, the thing about that argument is it's obviously always the open source people sort of saying, there's no security in obscurity. It's always the people with vested interests that are talking up open source as something that we should trust. People like Red Hat, who basically make their living out of open source.
That's their business model.
Software. Yeah. So, and you talk to somebody who doesn't seem to have a vested interest. There's a guy called Carsten Knoll, who's a German security expert. What you were talking about, Scott, just then, someone hacking into something and then getting in touch with the company and going, oh, there's a flaw here. You thought you should be aware of it. He does that. His company basically does it, but they get paid to do it. And they're specifically on the telecom side. And he's really highly respected. He's worked as like acting CTIO for some big operators while he's sort of been brought in to do consulting. And I've interviewed him once, and I've listened to him online on another occasion, and his view is very much that open source introduces all sorts of vulnerabilities, and we need to be quite concerned about it. And you basically got just so many more people involved in what's going on that if something goes wrong at one point, it's just easier for something to go wrong at one point.
Yeah.
And not necessarily, he's not necessarily saying we shouldn't go into the cloud and we shouldn't take advantage of these technologies.
Just be aware of the fucking downsides.
Be aware of it. There's all sorts of new issues it throws up, and probably a lot of them aren't being given a lot of attention. Like a lot of operators seem to be quite keen on being cloud native and taking advantage of some of this stuff without putting in place the kind of principles and systems and practices that you need to make sure it's all very, very safe and secure. It's not been very rigorously thought through, and it probably won't be until something bad happens. And then everybody will go, oh no, we didn't consider this. Why didn't we do something about it?
So, Andrew, do you feel that sometimes in the rush to innovate, we should try and slow down so that we don't get ahead of the security side of it?
Yeah, I think certainly years and years ago, I think it was spoken about more when you started getting internet connected, all sorts of things. It felt like it was maybe because it was new. And people would, freshen their minds, thinking, hold on, is there any downsides if that gets hacked? And kids have got these like bears that have cameras on them, security stuff. And I remember a big story at the time going, well, that can be hacked really easily. It's not even it hasn't got any security basically. And do we pay enough attention to that now? It's hard to say. I mean, it's not going to slow down in terms of connecting everything up, everything going into the cloud. There's the big movers and shakers of the technology industry are invested in that happening, and it's going to happen. These products are going to get launched because they want to sell new stuff, and until there's something else to say about new technology other than it's connected and therefore it can do this. Well, it's going to happen. It's just always going to be that arms.
Yeah, we understand the commercial imperative to innovate. You've got to have a new thing to talk about. That's why we always take the piss out of it in our sector. When a new G is coming along, people always jump the gun and start saying they've got the latest G when they've got nothing like it because they've been waiting 10 years for a new thing to bang on about. Okay, and I'll quickly move on to the other Qualcomm thing before we go into the final segment. The other Qualcomm announcement was that they've come up with a chip that enables direct-to-satellite connectivity. So we've spoken about this a few times in the past, principally talking about a company called Link, who seem to have been one of the pioneers in this direct-to-satellite thing. And just to stress, this is different from SpaceX. What's the brand of SpaceX that's for the connectivity? Starlink. There we go. Yeah, it's different from Starlink and that sort of thing because they go through hubs. They basically have satellite connectivity to a terrestrial hub, which is equivalent to like a router or something, which then distributes the connectivity thereafter. This is direct to satellite, as the name strongly implies. And it seems like a great idea. Problem with it is, as we realize from talking to companies like Link, is right now the bandwidth available only really facilitates SMS type of functionality. So basically these things are backup emergency services. So therefore when you've gone around hiking up in the fucking Alps and you've broken your leg and there's no connectivity, you should still be able to at least send a message going, someone come and pick me up or I'm going to die. Anyway.
Like a mass market service.
Say it again?
Sounds like a mass market service, that.
Yes. Well, quite. It is quite niche, and yet it seems really popular. Apple did a launch saying their phones were supporting it, and their satellite partner was, I think, Global Star.
Yeah.
And anyway, Qualcomm's just come out with this chip that supports it, and their satellite partner is Iridium. And you got at the same time there's a UK smartphone maker called Bullet that has come out that is also in this space. I can't remember who they use for satellites, but basically the long and short of it is you've got a hell of a lot of people involved. You've got standalone players like Link, you've got smaller players like Bullet, and then you've got Apple getting involved, you've got Qualcomm getting involved. They all seem to use different satellite providers. And the biggest thing for me is I can see the utility of it. Although I take your point, Ian, about it being a bit of a niche use case, especially so long as all you can do is send little emergency SMSs. But it also just seems very fragmented, and I think that whole sector's ripe for both consolidation and standardization. And I do gather from a quote I got emailed today that I put in my story that the 3GPP is working. This was a quote from a guy called Peter Kibutu, who works at a tech consultancy called TTP. That in 3GPP release 17, he says, the industry is now concurrently developing 5G non-terrestrial networks as defined by 3GPP release 17. So maybe that will make it a bit more coherent, but it seems really fragmented right now. Were you going to say something?
It might not stop companies from. I mean, I totally agree with you. It just seems like there's a lot of space junk being chucked up there.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to do LEO all of a sudden. There's all this interest in satellite, and yet the use cases are, either where there's a war going on, like Ukraine, or people living in the rainforest who can't get a terrestrial signal, or somebody falls down a crevice while he's mountaineering and needs to send an SMS up. And it's like the economics.
Crevice is a great word. I must use it more often.
Iridium and Globalstar, by the way, are companies. I sat in meetings with Globalstar back in 1999, 2000 when I was when I was a business analyst, and everybody was talking about satellite, and it was like that was where all the money was. And Iridium was an even bigger deal. They were like
and they've all gone bankrupt since then and come back in some form.
They've been resurrected and now have these shitty little. I mean, I don't know what the terms of Globalstar's deal is with Apple, but I can't imagine that it will be able to make much money from having a service that might be used by a couple of mountaineers a year who break a leg while they're climbing in the Alps.
Yeah, and there's no premium. It's not like Qualcomm or Apple or whatever are charging for it. It's just thrown in.
Yeah. So Apple is, Apple's got lots of money and they can probably afford to pay Globalstar something to be able to do this. But it sounds like a sort of, is anyone really making anything out of this? The economics really stack up if you look at it properly. I just
maybe it's.
I need to get my head around the satellite thing a bit more, maybe in 2023.
I know. No, I agree with you. It all seems the economics don't seem obvious.
Yeah,
maybe it's a dipping your toe in the water or sort of thinning of the wedge type of thing. Right now it's quite niche, but there will come a time where if they've proven it, then they invest in the technology to have better bandwidth over the air. But I mean, it's never going to be as good as still normal cellular or Wi-Fi.
Exactly, and we're at a point now with normal cellular where where do you go where you don't get a signal? Yeah, up in the Alps on the top of Mount Everest. I mean, Christ,
I get some not spots where I certainly revert back to 3G.
I know there are, but those not spots will probably get targeted by cellular within the next few years, and there aren't that many of them, are there? And sometimes actually, unless you are mountaineering or doing some kind of extreme sports activity, it's actually quite nice to go somewhere where you can't get a cellular signal. Frankly, I think,
Yeah, it's not so nice when you got kids because they won't stop moaning about it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we're just an older generation maybe who doesn't.
No, but it's probably good for them, isn't
it? Yeah, exactly, yeah.
What I'm really revealing is what a lazy parent I am, and how when I want them to shut up, I just go and look at your device and be quiet. Yeah. Okay, so before we go on to the final bit, Andrew, did you have any thoughts on that satellite stuff we were just banging on about?
Yeah, broadly in agreement. I've written up a few stories last year of companies getting into that space, and you're always left thinking, how big can this market possibly be? It does make sense that if you're lost in the Arctic and being able to send a text message, you'll be very thankful for. I don't know, are 15 firms going to be able to make money out of that use case? I don't know. Yeah. And then they change sometimes what they're talking about as well. And they do say, just domestically, so mainland US or in the UK, where there's a bit of a not spot, bit of a patchy area. Satellites can swoop in and solve that. And you just think, wouldn't it be easy to just build a tower nearby there? But you have to send a satellite into space to go over that little boundary in Essex to make sure that that can be. Because it seems like overkill, and I'm not
especially
sure
Essex. Surely we'd be better off with Essex not being connected.
Well, this is it.
Even the advertising's a bit laughable for it. I remember when the iPhone 14 came out, and this is one of the features they're talking about, this satellite feature through Globalstar, and they had their promotional video. They had some woman standing in a scene that looked like something from Little House on the Prairie, and then proceeded to, because she wasn't up a mountain herself, even that wasn't obscure enough. She then had to sort of skip to a video where someone's up a mountain and they break an angle. And it's not exactly Netflix, is it? In the evening, something that millions of people are going to do every day. It's just so, it really seems quite desperate. A kind of
and I think it's good. Let's not totally belittle it. For those emergency use cases, that's great. And if every smartphone now, as a default, has this fallback, we'll scoff, and then one of us will suddenly get all energetic and end up in a crevice. And I'm talking about energetic in terms of the great outdoors here, by the way. And then we'll be grateful. But it's hard to see the business case.
I want instead. I want like a sensor system that sends an alert when you drop your phone in the oven. It sends an emergency signal so that
there's a niche use case that you would have been grateful for.
Than getting lost in a mountain.
If you had a
what were you going to say, Andrew?
I was just going to say. So you've had specific satellite phones already for years. So that would solve that issue, right? If you're up a mountain, wouldn't it be cheaper for that person
as long as you had a satellite phone?
Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
For those three people, three people that it affects, they buy a satellite phone. And
they've already got them.
The world, well, they've probably got them anyway because they go, oh, well, I might fall down a crevice. I'll get a satellite phone.
You go mountain
rather than the whole world buying a fleet of satellites.
That bloke who had to gnaw his own arm off. He wouldn't have had to do that if he'd had a satellite phone.
Yeah, but he could have had a satellite phone.
Why didn't he take one? He could have,
He didn't need satellite built into his standard phone. Well, how much of a hassle is it to take a satellite phone with you on that weekend when you go mountaineering?
Perhaps he did, but it was in the other pocket.
Big aerial gets in the fucking way in my backpack. Really?
Fell in his oven.
Anyway, I think, joking aside, there are complete pros, like people who climb Everest who probably do have specialist communications equipment. I think it is handy to know that, in principle, if I've got the latest phone, and the worst case scenario happened, I could connect, but it does feel like a niche use case, and it's hard to see where the money is in it. So I think we all agree on that. Okay, let's. We've only got about 20 minutes left. Ian, we were talking earlier about annoying company names. There's a German operator with an annoying name that's launched the first full Open RAN network in Europe, or so it claims. What did you write about that?
I did, yeah. 1&1 they're called, or I don't know.
What the fuck? Why don't they just call themselves two?
What is it in German? You speak a bit of German, don't you?
Ein und ein.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
They're
that's even more annoying.
They seem to have various names because aren't they? Did they merge with Drillish, or are they the same as?
Yeah,
Drillish?
well, they're part of it.
They're also, and they're owned by United Internet, which is a broadband company basically in Germany that's been providing. I suppose it's a little bit like Iliad in France to some extent, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, so they're like a fourth greenfield operate MNO in Germany. Yeah,
well, they picked up some spectrum in Germany's 5G auction a couple of years ago, and they've been using that to basically build a fourth mobile network. So they're kind of doing a similar thing to Rakuten in Japan and Dish Network in the US, and they're fairly prominent and high profile because of that, because they're using this concept called Open RAN to do it. So instead of, we talk about Open RAN all the time, obviously on this pod, but going along with an Ericsson or a Huawei or a Nokia and taking everything from one big equipment vendor, they're taking advantage of these new interfaces which give you interoperability, kind of the stuff Andrew was talking about on the consumer side, except from a network perspective. So you can buy your radios and have those working with your computing equipment and mix and match different vendors basically, and The idea being that then you're less reliant on a single, on a big vendor. You get more competition into the market. You can take advantage of specialists who might be better in certain areas, and hopefully the competition pushes down costs. And that's essentially what Open RAN is. And there's a lot of publicity about 1&1, partly because they're doing that, partly because they're sort of systems integrator that they've appointed to kind of do the work for them and to figure out who should be used and put it all together is Rakuten. So one of the companies that's doing this in Japan, the company that's doing this in Japan, has actually sort of also got a vendor arm, and his flagship customer is 1&1. So that's the other reason why they attract a lot of attention, and also because it's like a fourth network. So it's quite a big change for Germany, which since a merger a few years ago, I think when Telefonica bought, what was it called, E Plus, I think.
Right.
They merged with Plus, didn't they? Germany's been, in a region that seems to like having 4 mobile networks per country. Germany's been this kind of standout case.
Well, I don't know if it's a direct consequence, but normally what happens, certainly with the European Union, is they allow consolidation as long as the people doing the consolidation give up a bunch of shit in order to facilitate the forming of a new competitor, in order to maintain this 4-company thing. So I don't know if that happened in Germany, but that's a fairly well-trodden path, isn't it?
I know what they did was, I think something like that went on. I mean, Drillich, which I think, is either merged with or is another name that 1&1 uses. But I mean, 1&1's functioned as a kind of MVNO for a long time. And I think one of the things when that Telefonica E Plus merger happened, they were told, well, you can do it, but you have to sort of sell 20% of capacity on your network to an MVNO, basically. They include all these stipulations that make the whole thing a lot less attractive. And then obviously when they did come to auction spectrum, 1&1 comes along and buys a load, which it wouldn't do if it wasn't going to build a fourth mobile network. So
and sometimes they get a leg up, don't they? They get it on the cheap or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know if they did. I think they still seem to pay quite heavily, and they don't appear to have as much as everybody else. Obviously, they don't have the sort of legacy spectrum that you got for your old 2G and 3G days for a start. Which again is another problem for them. It's another issue for them, I think, in terms of competitiveness. But yeah, I mean, before anybody gets too excited that they've launched this new network based on Open RAN, that's the kind of headline. Then you read the small print.
Yeah.
Well, it's 3 sites, it seems, at the moment. From They didn't actually get back to me. They're terrible. Their PR people are absolutely awful at responding to anything. Out. So they didn't actually get back to me when I asked for clarification on how many sites are in commercial service. But if you read the press release, which sort of tried to obscure it, I think, as much as possible, it seems like they have 3. And there's another 50, I think, that are due to enter service in the next few weeks. And then they're working on another 250. And then they had this target, which they were supposed to reach by the end of 2022. They had this target of having 1,000 sites in operation by the end of 2022. Well, they've obviously missed that.
Was it? Was that a 22 one? Because in their press release, they put it as a 23 thing.
Well, yeah, because they'd already had this update where they run into a 6-month delay because they were let down by a company called Vantage Towers. Vantage Towers is a tower co, as the name implies. It's owned by Vodafone, although Vodafone is attracting other equity partners at the moment and likely to sort of end up with about 50% of it. But they basically provide the passive infrastructure for 1&1 to hang its equipment.
And they dropped the ball.
And related services. And they dropped the ball. They were sort of identified eventually. I have to give credit.
Yeah, you did some good reporting on that. You did a bit of digging around, didn't you?
I did, although the guy who got the scoop and actually got full confirmation that it was Vantage was Ray at Telecom TV.
Fair enough. Credit where it's due.
As well. But they
Ray. We can't get rid of him.
Can't get rid of him, yeah. But they sort of were the culprit, and so that's actually nothing to do with Open RAN, really. We should say that site issue. But even so, they said they were 6 months behind, implying that they'd have these 1,000 sites served by end June this year.
Yeah. Now they're basically going end of the year, aren't they?
Well, they said during the course of 2023, I think, which makes it even more vague. So.
Yeah, well, that's certainly giving themselves wriggle room till the end of the year, isn't it?
And it's a long way to go if they've spent this time working on it. Quite a long time now they've been working on this project, and they've got 3 sites up and 50 coming and 250 under construction. To get to 1,000 by mid-year sounds like they're really going to have to ramp things up. I mean, the big problem for them is, it's a bit like Rakuten in Japan. Everybody talks about this project and it's nationwide now, and and they've got this kind of charismatic CTO or CEO, actually now was CTO, Tariq Amin, who's a really interesting guy and talks in a compelling way about this stuff. But you look at the financials and they're really appalling. It's a real horror show. They've this company that's basically Japan's answer to Amazon, if you like, is like a smaller version of Amazon, is now racking up billions of dollars in losses over the last few years because of this mobile project, because you have to spend, no matter how much, whether we believe all the arguments about Open RAN and virtualization lowering costs and making it more economic, you still got to spend a huge amount of money on building sites.
Well, they might lower OPEX, but not CapEx.
I mean, I think that I'm dubious about some of the claims about cost anyway, and I think a lot of people are increasingly dubious about those claims that get attached, not just to Open RAN, but to virtualization from a sort of cost angle. But even if you believe it, they still have to spend a lot of money on building out this network. You can't get away from that. It's a big job to build a telecom network in a country. And at the same time, they've not managed to attract very many customers. So in a market of 125 million people, Rakuten's managed to attract 5 million customers at the last sort of time it did an update. Compare that with NTT Docomo, which I think is still the biggest, they have about 80 million. And I think they've never sort of put their hand up and said, we're really disappointed at the slow take up, because they wouldn't. But analysts expect them to do a lot better than that, or would have hoped they would have done a lot better. And that's the reason why their financial situation is as bad as it is, because obviously if they had 30 or 40 million people paying for service, then things might not look quite as bad. But
I mean, and it might seem like on this pod we're constantly having a pop at Open RAN, but I'll stress, speaking only for myself, but I suspect you, my self-appointed task isn't to have a pop at any particular technology, it's to question hype. And when the incoming stuff is always like, oh, this is the best thing ever, then any journalist should go, well, is it?
Yeah.
And the points you make about the economics are well made. I mean, just the quote, the canned quote from Ralph Dommermuth, who's the CEO of 1&1. He goes, the commissioning of our Open RAN network underscores our position as pioneers who now provide evidence in Germany that the world's most modern networking technology is fully functional. 3 sites. That's hardly a network. I suppose it's technically a network. And then he goes, despite delays in recent months, we still want to meet our obligation to cover 50% of all households by the end of 2023, which is apparently ahead of schedule, or perhaps they want to get it ahead of 2023. It was a bit ambiguous. And anyway, so I just thought that was interesting. Firstly, there was that sort of overstatement of talking up a big network, which consists currently of 3 sites. And then he actually made direct reference to delays, which I thought was interesting. A lot of time canned quotes don't make any reference to setbacks. So he's obviously feeling under a bit of pressure and felt compelled, while again, he didn't explicitly name Vantage, felt compelled to sort of point to these delays and infer that, they were to some degree out of his control.
I mean, they've taken a lot of flack in Germany, apparently, in the German press for this. I mean, they probably care more about what the big German newspapers are writing, obviously, than they did about readings coverage. But maybe that's why they've asked to get back to me. But he's been under pressure, and they're going to have a really tough time of it over the next couple of years. And maybe it'll come good in the end. But as we're talking about Rakuten, you look at how much 1&1 was spending in, not last year, the year before. I'm losing track of what year we're in because I can't keep up with New Year's these days. But back in 2021, I think their capital expenditure was about 250 million. Last year, they expected to spend $1 billion. They actually ended up spending, because of the rollout, basically, because it's a massive increase. They actually ended up spending, they reckon, about 700 because of the delays. So they couldn't get work done, meant that they spent less than they expected to.
I see.
But as a result, they're way behind. So they're going to have to spend, presumably,
although he's deferring that expense
this year to catch up and keep it going. You would think there's going to be a huge capex investment that needs to be made in 2023, and then and then that's not going to end. That's going to go on for a few years. So they're going to be in a similar situation to Rakuten, unless they can do something. Maybe they can have do a better job of attracting customers, than Rakuten's done, but. It's a bit weird in a way to me why Rakuten hasn't been able to attract more subscribers It's
yeah, especially as it can presumably appeal to other aspects of its business.
Well, that's the key thing. And I asked the last time I interviewed Tarek Amin, which was in person, which was actually at Mobile World Congress last year. I remember asking him about this, and he was like, "Oh, well, this is all coming. The marketing of because what they can do, which one won't be able to do, is say if you're a telecom customer, you can take advantage of all these other services that we do, these e-commerce and banking services,
and vice versa.
Yeah, and we can provide it to you low cost, and you can be part of our ecosystem, and it's like Amazon including free deliveries with its video service sort of thing, and make it look really nice. And yet that hasn't lured that many people, it seems, and they claim to be providing services for a lot less than the incumbents, and that hasn't lured. I mean, apparently the Japanese are less price sensitive than most consumers in other parts of the world, but that's
because they're all about 60.
Yeah. It's not a given that 1&1's going to be a massive, hit with German consumers, and if they're not, then they've got that struggle of trying to make money from this, and then the other thing that we haven't seen yet, but I wrote something else on Open RAN this week, because to me the big issue for Open RAN at the moment really is this systems integration job. This, it all sounds very nice, doesn't it? Bringing in lots of different vendors and not being overly reliant on one, and getting them to getting them to kind of work together, and having that sort of team of suppliers. But even the people doing it will acknowledge that it's incredibly hard to make it work. You've either got to take on that operational hassle yourself of integrating it all and making sure everything works, and making sure that your components from your radio components from one person are compatible with the IT stuff you get from someone else, or you've got to put a systems integrator in charge, which is another expense. And then you're arguably handing too much control to them. You just have another form of lock-in. So
yeah,
and these.
No, I completely agree. I completely agree with your take on that. I mean, I noted in my final paragraph of my coverage, which was presumably a lot shorter than yours, as is often the case. They named all these suppliers, and there was a good diverse list. There was, as well as some inevitable ones with Rakuten being a main partner, such as Altiostar, which Rakuten owns, and then NEC, which is quite Rakuten adjacent. There was also Dell, Supermicro, Cisco, Mavenir, CCI, and so that's all groovy. But and I think you agree with this point. If the routers are always Cisco, or if the whole tech stack is always those combination of people providing different things, and it's all integrated by Rakuten Symphony or whatever, then how is that massively different than having all those things with a Ericsson label on and that's integrated by Ericsson?
That's a top point, I think, because just because you've got 6 or 7 vendors in there instead of one doesn't mean, it arguably means you've got more dependencies. Because if you look at that list of vendors that they call out, like you just said, they've only got Cisco for routers. They've only got Rakuten for RAN software.
So there's bottlenecks everywhere.
Unless you have 2 for each domain, which then means having a huge number of vendors. Sorry, the cat's tail is going past my phone.
Excellent.
Unless you have a huge number of vendors, like 2 for each domain, then you've still got dependencies. You've got more dependencies. You're in a worse position, arguably, and you're dependent also on a small company. I mean, is it better to be dependent on a multi-billion-dollar firm like Nokia for everything than it is to rely on someone like Mavenir?
At least you've got that one throat to choke and all that.
Yeah. And some of these startups in Open RAN, like I mean, Mavenir, you can't really call it a startup. It's been around for a few years, but the last time that they published results a couple of years ago, which they did when they were trying to IPO, they're loss making. They're making about 500, 600 million a year in revenues. They're not a massive company. We talk about companies going out of business and worries about things happening. You'd be more concerned about entrusting things to your software for your whole radio network to a Mavenir than you would to a Nokia, surely. So this whole argument about dependency and over reliance on particular vendors, because we're using lots of vendors, we don't have that, is just utter rubbish. Actually, it just doesn't compute. It doesn't add up. Yeah,
and I'm going to conclude, Andrew, if you don't mind. We're coming to the top of the hour, and I know you didn't write about this, so I might just sort of conclude without asking for your input on it. But I just think the point you made earlier about how Rakuten 1&1. I don't know what the financials are for Dish, but I bet they're similar. If they're set up as these greenfield Open RAN launches and these great exemplars, then they need to be exemplars when things aren't going well. And if the current financial and rollout picture is not so great, then we're entitled to make broad conclusions about Open RAN from that, just as they're entitled to hype it up. So, I think I'm pleased that these greenfield projects are going are underway, and I want Open RAN to work. But I'm just saying right now, if you keep hyping it up when the biggest exemplars are struggling, then there's a sort of contradiction there.
I think one of the other interesting things is, and this is sort of the gist of the opinionated piece that I wrote, that we're one of the things you've seen coming out last year was companies moving into former specialists, guys that might just have done one thing, the sort of people that Open RAN was supposed to give a lift to, because you could use this, you could assemble a combination of these companies and have them substitute for an Ericsson, say, or a Nokia, have moved into other bits of the value chain. So Mavenir, for instance, started out as a RAN software specialist. Now it's making radios. Last year it went into systems integration and actually specifically used the word end-to-end supplier. NEC as a much bigger company, obviously, because it's involved in lots of other things that aren't even telecom specific always. But, they were very much highly regarded at first when they started working with Rakuten for their radio units and their hardware. More recently, they've gone into software. They've also been pitching themselves as a systems integrator. Fujitsu is doing something similar. And then you look at some of the contracts. From what I understand, Samsung is now supplying quite a lot of equipment in the US, where it's got 5G deals with some of the big operators. That is it's ORAN Alliance compatible, basically. So the ORAN Alliance is the body that's kind of behind Open RAN specifications.
Yeah.
But the customers it's selling to are buying the whole stack of products from Samsung. So they're not leaving any role for other vendors. So you have this situation where it's Open RAN, but it's all coming from a kind of single player. And I see this potentially happening. Is
it any better technically, and is it any cheaper? If not, then what's the fucking point?
All Open RAN is, I don't care what people say, it's supposed to, it doesn't just do that, it does other things. No, it doesn't. All Open RAN is, forget about the virtualization side of it, because that's something different. It's related, but it's not the same. Open RAN is just interfaces that allow you to put your radios with, your baseband equipment from different
open interfaces.
Open interfaces. It's basically about multi-vendor. It's about making it easier to use different suppliers. So if they use these interfaces, but they're still taking it all from one vendor, then it kind of defeats the purpose, doesn't it? It's kind of what's the point,
I'm with you.
We could have a situation where we end up in the late 2020s where Open RAN specs are everywhere. They're kind of baked in maybe, and they're always in tenders and everybody's compatible with them. But we still have several big companies providing everything.
Yeah. And just one thing I want to reflect on that, and then I'll wrap up. I agree with everything you said. I think if we were doing a normal pod where we'd had about 3 or 4 beers by now, we might not have been able to have such a technical conversation about Open RAN. So there's something in favour of dry January. I think when we're drinking beer, we have to get the Open RAN shit in early while we can still think clearly. And then just save the last one for a sort of ranty current affairs type of thing. Cool. All right. Well, we better wrap it up there. Hopefully we're going to be in the studio next week, and hopefully we're going to have a guest. So make sure you join us for that one. But until then, have a good one. Cheers.